The world's first billionaire started his financial career by recording $3.57 in a notebook. Not a business plan, not a stock tip, not an inheritance. A cloth-bound ledger purchased for pennies, where a 16-year-old clerk named John D. Rockefeller documented every cent that passed through his hands. That ledger still exists. You can view it at the Library of Congress. Researchers call it Ledger A. It spans from 1855 to 1919. It contains the DNA of a $300 million fortune that would become the largest the world had ever seen. Most people believe Rockefeller became wealthy because he discovered oil. This is the comfortable myth. Oil was the vehicle. The ledger was the engine. Before Rockefeller touched a single barrel of crude, he had already engineered the behavioral architecture that would make him untouchable. At age 16, earning $95 per year as an assistant bookkeeper at Hewitt & Tuttle in Cleveland, he allocated 6% of his income to charity and a fixed percentage to savings before he spent a single cent on himself. He tracked expenditures down to fractions of pennies. He treated money not as a reward for labor, but as a raw material to be processed, refined, and deployed. This was not obsession. This was infrastructure. The same year Rockefeller opened Ledger A, the average American worker earned roughly $300 annually. Most spent every dollar. The concept of systematic saving did not exist in popular culture. Banks served merchants and landowners. The working class operated on a consumption-to-consumption cycle with zero accumulation. Rockefeller rejected this default setting before he understood what he was rejecting. By the time he launched his first business venture at age 18, he had saved enough capital to contribute $1,000 to a produce-commission partnership. Within 4 years, that partnership generated enough returns to fund his entry into oil refining. Within 20 years, Standard Oil controlled 90% of American oil refining capacity. The mythology says Rockefeller was ruthless. The mythology says he was lucky. The mythology says he was in the right place at the right time. The documentation says he was systematic. The ledger proves it. Welcome to Noob Historian. We follow the money, trace the power, and expose the history they never taught you in school. Here is what your teachers never explained. You are living through a period of economic anxiety. Inflation erodes your purchasing power. Social media displays curated lifestyles funded by debt. Financial influencers sell complexity. And beneath all of it, the simplest wealth-building system in documented history continues operating exactly as Rockefeller operated it 160 years ago. This video will show you the documented evidence, not theory, not motivation, not inspiration. The primary sources, the academic studies, the original manuscripts, the receipts. The question is not whether this system works. The question is why you were never taught it. In 2022, a team of researchers at Hamburg University published the most statistically rigorous study of millionaire psychology ever conducted. The study appeared in Nature Human Behavior. The researchers, led by Morten Leckelt and Mitja Bak, accessed the German Socioeconomic Panel, a longitudinal dataset tracking the economic lives of German citizens since 1984. They analyzed 23,121 general population respondents, alongside 1,125 verified millionaires holding a minimum of $1 million in individual net wealth. This was not a survey of people who felt wealthy. This was a verified asset census. The researchers divided the millionaire sample into two categories. Inherited wealth millionaires received their fortunes through family transfer. Self-made millionaires built their wealth through entrepreneurship and self-employment. The self-made category contained 517 individuals. The findings demolished popular assumptions about wealth and personality. Self-made millionaires scored measurably higher than the general population on 4 personality dimensions: risk tolerance, openness to experience, extroversion, conscientiousness. They scored measurably lower on 1 dimension: neuroticism. The inherited wealth millionaires did not share this profile. Their personality distributions resembled the general population. Money had not changed them. They had not changed to earn money. This distinction matters. The self-made millionaires exhibited a personality configuration that preceded their wealth accumulation. The traits were not consequences of financial success. The traits were contributing causes. Consider what this means for the average person consuming financial content. The internet overflows with tactical advice. Buy this stock, avoid that expense, use this app. The tactics assume a personality substrate that will execute them. But execution is not a tactic. Execution is a trait. Conscientiousness is measurable. Risk tolerance is measurable. Neuroticism is measurable. The Hamburg study found that self-made millionaires scored in the top 10% of the population on conscientiousness. They were not slightly more disciplined than average. They were categorically different. Now layer in the risk tolerance finding. The general population exhibits moderate risk aversion. Self-made millionaires exhibited elevated risk tolerance, not recklessness, tolerance. They could absorb the emotional discomfort of uncertain outcomes without abandoning their strategy. This maps directly onto Rockefeller's documented behavior. When the oil market crashed in 1867, most refiners panicked. Rockefeller studied the bottleneck. Refining capacity exceeded crude supply. Prices would stabilize once weak operators folded. He bought distressed assets. He expanded capacity during contraction. He absorbed short-term uncertainty for long-term structural advantage. Conscientiousness provided the system. Risk tolerance provided the nerve. The Hamburg researchers also measured openness to experience. Self-made millionaires scored higher. They were more willing to explore unfamiliar domains. They were less bound by conventional frameworks. Rockefeller did not inherit the refining business from his father. His father was a con artist who sold fake cancer cures. Rockefeller entered an industry that did not exist during his childhood. He mapped opportunity onto blank terrain. Extroversion appeared in the profile as well. Self-made millionaires were more socially assertive. They initiated contact. They built networks. They converted relationships into leverage. Rockefeller maintained meticulous correspondence with partners, competitors, railroad executives, and bankers. His social infrastructure enabled his business infrastructure. Finally, the Hamburg study documented low neuroticism. Self-made millionaires experienced less emotional volatility. They did not spiral when outcomes disappointed. They did not celebrate prematurely when outcomes exceeded expectations. They operated on a flattened emotional baseline that allowed consistent execution. This is the personality architecture of wealth. Not luck, not timing, not information asymmetry. A measurable configuration of traits that can be identified before wealth exists, and that predicts wealth accumulation with statistical significance. The study authors did not claim these traits were immutable. Conscientiousness can be developed. Risk tolerance can be calibrated. Neuroticism can be reduced through deliberate practice. But they emphasized the finding that most personal finance education ignores personality entirely. It assumes the reader already possesses the substrate for execution. The Hamburg data proves this assumption is false. You possess a measurable personality profile. That profile either supports or undermines systematic wealth accumulation. The first step is measurement. The second step is modification. The third step is execution. Rockefeller never took a personality assessment. He did not need one. His ledger was the assessment. Every entry documented his conscientiousness. Every business decision documented his risk tolerance. Every charitable contribution documented his emotional stability. The ledger was both the record and the proof. The 2022 study translated Rockefeller's intuition into statistical verification. 160 years of evidence compressed into a peer-reviewed framework. The question is not whether you can become wealthy. The question is whether your current personality architecture supports the behaviors that produce wealth. The Hamburg researchers answered that question with data. The answer is uncomfortable, and it is actionable. In 1996, Dr. Thomas J. Stanley and William D. Danko published findings from 20 years of research into American millionaire households. The book was titled The Millionaire Next Door. It sold over 3 million copies. It transformed popular understanding of wealth accumulation. And it was based entirely on documented survey research and in-depth interviews with over 1,000 verified millionaire households. Stanley and Danko did not theorize about wealth. They measured it. They surveyed households with net worth exceeding $1 million. They tracked income, consumption, asset allocation, and intergenerational wealth transfer. They visited homes. They inspected vehicles. They reviewed financial statements. Their findings contradicted every cultural assumption about American millionaires. First finding: 80% of American millionaires were first-generation wealthy. They did not inherit their fortunes. They built them from zero. The stereotype of multi-generational aristocracy applied to a small minority. Second finding: the average millionaire lived in a house valued under $320,000 in 1996 dollars. Adjusted for inflation, roughly $620,000 in 2024 dollars. These were not estates. These were middle-class homes in middle-class neighborhoods. Millionaires were invisible. Third finding: most millionaires drove used cars, not economy cars, not luxury cars. Used vehicles that depreciated on someone else's balance sheet before transfer. The researchers documented millionaires driving pickup trucks, sedans, and SUVs that averaged 3 to 4 years of age at purchase. Fourth finding: the median household income of the millionaires surveyed was $131,000, high by national standards, but not extreme. Not the incomes of executives, athletes, or entertainers. Professional incomes, business owner incomes, incomes that could be spent entirely on consumption, if the household chose consumption. Fifth finding: the millionaires accumulated wealth disproportionate to their incomes because they saved at rates far exceeding national averages. They spent below their means. They invested the difference. They extended their time horizons beyond immediate gratification. Stanley and Danko coined a formula. Multiply your age by your pre-tax annual household income, divide by 10. The result is your expected net worth if you are an average accumulator of wealth. Millionaires exceeded this formula by 200%, 300%, 500%, or more. They were prodigious accumulators of wealth, not prodigious earners, prodigious keepers. The researchers identified 2 categories of wealth accumulators: Under accumulators of wealth, UAWs earned high incomes but saved poorly. They drove expensive cars. They lived in expensive neighborhoods. They consumed their earnings in real time. Their balance sheets did not reflect their lifestyles. Prodigious accumulators of wealth, PAWs, earned moderate to high incomes but saved aggressively. They drove modest cars. They lived in modest neighborhoods. They converted earnings into assets systematically. Their balance sheets dwarfed their lifestyles. The key insight was the decoupling of income and wealth. American culture treats these as synonymous. They are not. Income is a flow. Wealth is a stock. You can have high flow and low stock. You can have moderate flow and high stock. The behavior determines the outcome, not the paycheck. Stanley died in 2015. His daughter, Dr. Sarah Stanley Fallow, continued his research. In 2018, she published The Next Millionaire Next Door, updating the original findings for the 21st century economy. Her conclusion: the original thesis remained valid. The mechanisms of wealth accumulation had not changed. The behaviors that produced millionaires in 1976 produced millionaires in 2018. Consider the implications. Between 1996 and 2018, the American economy experienced the dot-com bubble, the 2008 financial crisis, the rise of social media, the gig economy, and the explosion of financial technology. The instruments changed, the apps changed, the platforms changed, the tax code changed, the behavioral code did not change. Prodigious accumulators continued spending below their means. They continued investing the difference. They continued extending time horizons. They continued avoiding lifestyle inflation that consumed marginal income. This is the uncomfortable truth the financial industry does not advertise. Complexity is not required. Sophistication is not required. Insider information is not required. The behaviors Rockefeller documented in 1865, the behaviors Stanley documented in 1996, and the behaviors Fallow documented in 2018 are identical. The variation is execution. The mechanism is fixed. Andrew Carnegie arrived in the United States at age 12 with his family. They had nothing. His father was a weaver whose trade had been destroyed by industrial mechanization in Scotland. The Carnegies settled in Pittsburgh in 1848 and entered the American economy at its lowest rung. Carnegie took his first job as a bobbin boy in a cotton mill. His wage was $1.20 per week. He worked 12-hour days. He was a child laborer in an era before child labor restrictions existed. By 1901, Carnegie sold his steel interests to J.P. Morgan for $480 million. Adjusted for economic share, this represents over $300 billion in contemporary terms. Carnegie became one of the wealthiest humans in recorded history. The mythology attributes this outcome to talent, timing, and ruthlessness. The documentation reveals something different. Carnegie engineered a three-phase wealth system that he later articulated in explicit written form. In 1889, Carnegie published an essay in the North American Review titled Wealth. It was later collected as The Gospel of Wealth in a 1900 edition. The essay contained Carnegie's explicit philosophy of capital accumulation and distribution. Carnegie described three life phases for the ambitious individual. Phase 1. The first portion of life should be devoted to acquiring education and developing personal capacities. Carnegie educated himself voraciously despite having no formal schooling beyond age 13. He used Pittsburgh's public library, he attended lectures, he cultivated mentors in the telegraph and railroad industries. Phase 2. The middle portion of life should be devoted to acquiring wealth, not consuming it, acquiring it. Carnegie reinvested virtually all earnings during his working years. Before entering the steel business, he worked as a telegraph messenger, a telegraph operator, and a railroad executive. Each position generated income. Each income was converted to capital. Each capital deployment generated additional income. Carnegie's railroad years illustrate the mechanism. As an employee of the Pennsylvania Railroad, Carnegie received stock tips and investment opportunities from his supervisor, Thomas Scott. Carnegie did not spend his railroad salary. He invested it in railroad bonds, sleeping car companies, and oil ventures. By age 30, Carnegie's passive income from investments exceeded his active income from employment. He had built a financial machine that operated independent of his labor. Phase 3. The final portion of life should be devoted to distributing wealth for public benefit. Carnegie articulated this as a moral obligation. He built over 2,500 public libraries. He funded universities, research institutions, and peace organizations. He gave away roughly 90% of his fortune before his death in 1919. But the critical insight is not Carnegie's philanthropy. The critical insight is Phase 2. Carnegie did not build wealth by earning more than he spent. He built wealth by spending almost nothing. Contemporary readers misunderstand this distinction. They believe the formula is simple. Earn more than you spend. Save the difference. This is accurate, but incomplete. Carnegie's formula was extreme. Spend almost nothing. Convert almost everything to capital. Reinvest all returns. Extend the timeline until compounding overwhelms arithmetic. During his railroad years, Carnegie lived modestly despite rising income. His correspondence with his mother reveals a man who avoided conspicuous consumption, even as his net worth climbed into the millions. He did not upgrade his lifestyle proportionally to his income. He maintained fixed consumption while maximizing reinvestment. This is the behavior Rockefeller exhibited. This is the behavior the Stanley research documented. This is the behavior the Hamburg study associated with elevated conscientiousness and reduced neuroticism. Carnegie wrote it down. He published it. He explained exactly what he was doing and why he was doing it. The Gospel of Wealth is not a hidden document. It is available in every research library. It has been in print continuously for 135 years. The mechanism is documented. The mechanism is public. The mechanism is operational. The question is whether you will execute it. In Q3 2025, Fidelity Investments released their quarterly retirement analysis. The headline number, 654,000 401k millionaires. This was a record, though. It represented a 50% increase from the previous year. It documented individuals who had accumulated $1 million or more in their employer-sponsored retirement accounts through disciplined, systematic, long-term investing. The financial media covered the story briefly. They moved on quickly. The story lacked drama, it lacked controversy, it lacked a single protagonist. But the data contained the most important wealth-building evidence of the decade. Consider who these 654,000 individuals are. They are not founders of technology companies. They are not inheritors of family fortunes. They are not lottery winners or cryptocurrency speculators. They are employees. They work for corporations that offer 401k plans. They allocate a percentage of each paycheck to tax-advantaged retirement accounts. They select diversified investment options. They do not touch the money. The average account balance among Fidelity 401k millionaires reached $1.66 million. The average savings rate was 17.5% of income. The average account tenure was 26 years. 26 years. That is the timeline, not months, not quarters, decades. The behavioral pattern is identical to Rockefeller's Ledger A. Pay yourself first, allocate before spending, extend the time horizon, allow compounding to operate. The 654,000 millionaires did not require specialized knowledge. 401k accounts offer limited investment options. Most participants select target date funds that automatically rebalance based on age. The investment decisions are simplified to the point of automation. What the 654,000 millionaires required was behavioral consistency. They contributed during bull markets. They contributed during bear markets. They contributed during the 2008 financial crisis. They contributed during the 2020 pandemic crash. They did not panic. They did not withdraw. They did not time the market. They let time work. Fidelity also reported record numbers in two additional categories. IRA millionaires reached 533,000 in 401k. Accounts with balances exceeding $500,000 reached $1.5 million. The pipeline is filling. The next cohort of millionaires is already visible in the data. Now consider what this evidence proves. The wealth-building mechanism that Rockefeller pioneered in 1865, that Carnegie systematized in 1889, that Stanley documented in 1996, is producing 654,000 millionaires annually through retirement accounts alone. This does not include taxable brokerage accounts. This does not include real estate equity. This does not include business ownership. This is one account type, one savings mechanism, one slice of the wealth-building infrastructure. The 401k is a historically recent instrument. It was created by a provision in the Revenue Act of 1978. The first 401k plan launched in 1980. The instrument is 45 years old. Within that window, it has produced hundreds of thousands of documented millionaires. The instrument is new. The mechanism is ancient. Automatic payroll deduction enforces Rockefeller's pay-yourself-first behavior. Tax-deferred growth accelerates Carnegie's reinvestment doctrine. Penalty-protected accounts extend Stanley's time horizon findings. The 401k is behavioral architecture encoded into tax law. You are living through the largest documented wealth-building experiment in human history. The evidence is not theoretical. The evidence is filed with the IRS. The evidence is tracked by custodians like Fidelity, Vanguard, and Schwab. The evidence is published quarterly. The 654,000 millionaires do not appear on magazine covers. They do not post their portfolios on social media. They do not attract attention because their behavior is boring. They are invisible in the same way Stanley's millionaires next door were invisible. But they exist. The data proves they exist. And the data proves exactly how they got there. The cultural mythology of wealth in America centers on income. Earn more money, get promoted, negotiate raises, change jobs for higher salaries. The advice industry sells income optimization as the primary wealth-building mechanism. The documented evidence proves this is false. Stanley's research found the correlation between income and wealth was weaker than expected. High-income households frequently exhibited low net worth. Moderate-income households frequently exhibited high net worth. The variation came from behavior, not earning power. The Hamburg study found that self-made millionaires frequently earn less during their accumulation phase than high-income professionals who remained non-wealthy. The self-made millionaires converted moderate income to ownership. The high-income professionals converted high income to consumption. This is the critical distinction. Income flows through you. Ownership compounds for you. Rockefeller understood this at age 18. When he formed his produce commission partnership in 1859, he did not seek a higher salary. He sought equity. He owned a portion of the enterprise. When the enterprise generated profits, Rockefeller did not receive a wage increase. He received a capital distribution. The capital distribution was reinvested. The reinvestment generated additional capital. The cycle compounded. By the time Rockefeller entered the oil business, he was already an experienced owner. He understood the difference between trading time for money and deploying capital for returns. Carnegie followed the identical path. He worked for wages at the Pennsylvania Railroad, but he used those wages to purchase ownership stakes. His investments in Woodruff Sleeping Car Company, Columbia Oil Company, and other ventures converted wage income to equity income. By age 30, his equity income exceeded his wage income. He could have stopped working. He did not, but he no longer depended on wages to live. This is what the financial literacy industry fails to communicate. The goal is not income maximization. The goal is ownership acquisition. Ownership takes multiple forms. You can own stocks, you can own bonds, you can own real estate, you can own businesses. You can own intellectual property. The form varies. The principle is constant. Ownership generates returns independent of your labor. Returns can be reinvested. Reinvested returns generate additional returns. The cycle compounds. The 654,000 401k millionaires own equity. Their accounts hold shares of companies. Those companies generate profits. The profits flow to shareholders through price appreciation and dividends. The shareholders do not work for the companies. The companies work for the shareholders. This is the inversion the mythology obscures. Employees trade time for income. Owners deploy capital for returns. Employees are downstream of the enterprise. Owners are upstream. Rockefeller was upstream of Standard Oil. He owned it. The laborers, the managers, the refiners, the transporters were all downstream of Rockefeller's capital. He captured the flow. They contributed to it. Carnegie was upstream of Carnegie Steel. J.P. Morgan was upstream of U.S. Steel after the acquisition. The workers at the Homestead plant were downstream. The value they created flowed upstream to ownership. This is not a moral argument. This is a mechanical description. Capital flows upward. Ownership captures the flow. Labor contributes to the flow. If you rely exclusively on wage income, you are structurally downstream. You capture only what employers choose to pay. You compete with other laborers. Your income depends on showing up. If you convert wage income to ownership, you migrate upstream. You capture flows independent of your presence. You compete with other capital allocators, not other laborers. Your returns depend on asset performance, not attendance. The transition from downstream to upstream is the documented path every self-made millionaire in the historical record followed. Rockefeller made the transition. Carnegie made the transition. Stanley's POWs made the transition. The 654,000 401k millionaires are making the transition right now. The instruments have changed. Mutual funds did not exist in 1865. 401k plans did not exist in 1889. Index funds did not exist in 1976, but the mechanism of converting labor income to capital ownership has remained constant for 160 years. You can begin the transition with your next paycheck. The only requirement is the decision to redirect flow from consumption to ownership. The evidence presented across this video converges on a single conclusion. Self-made wealth is produced by a documented, reproducible behavioral code. The code has remained stable for 160 years. The code operates independent of macroeconomic conditions, technological changes, or tax policy shifts. The code produces millionaires during recessions and expansions, during bull markets and bear markets, during peace and war. The code has 5 components. Component 1, pay yourself first. Rockefeller allocated savings before spending at age 16. The 654,000 401k millionaires automate payroll deductions before their paychecks hit their bank accounts. The mechanism is identical. Remove the spending decision. Automate the saving decision. Your savings rate determines your wealth trajectory more than any other variable. The Stanley research found that American millionaires saved an average of 20% of their income. The Fidelity data found that 401k millionaires saved 17.5% of their income. If your current savings rate is below 15%, you are statistically unlikely to reach millionaire status through employment income alone. Increase your rate. Automate the increase. Remove your future self from the decision. Component 2, reinvest all returns. Carnegie articulated this in the Gospel of Wealth. During the accumulation phase, returns should not be consumed. Returns should be converted to additional capital. Additional capital generates additional returns. The cycle compounds. If you receive dividends, reinvest them. If you receive interest, reinvest it. If you receive capital gains, redeploy them. Do not withdraw from investment accounts during the accumulation phase. Do not take profits. Profits are not for taking. Profits are for compounding. Component 3, extend your time horizon. The average tenure of Fidelity's 401k Millionaires was 26 years. Rockefeller maintained Ledger A for 64 years. Carnegie's accumulation phase lasted from age 13 to age 66. The wealthy think in decades. The non-wealthy think in months. If you're 30 years old, you have 35 years until standard retirement age. That is enough time for modest contributions to compound into 7 figures. If you are 40 years old, you have 25 years. That is enough time for disciplined contributions to reach millionaire status. If you are 50 years old, you have 15 years. The math becomes harder. But the math still works if the behavior is correct. The enemy of time horizon extension is lifestyle inflation. When your income increases, your consumption tends to increase proportionally. This collapses your potential savings rate. It converts income growth to consumption growth rather than wealth growth. Stanley documented this pattern extensively. Under accumulators of wealth upgraded their lifestyles with every raise. Prodigious accumulators of wealth maintained fixed lifestyles and redirected income growth to savings. The behavioral difference produced 7-figure wealth differentials over 20-year periods. Component 4, own productive assets. The historical record shows self-made millionaires converting wage income to equity ownership as rapidly as possible. Rockefeller owned a portion of every business he entered. Carnegie owned shares of sleeping car companies, oil wells, and ironworks before he built his steel fortune. The 654,000 401k millionaires own diversified equity portfolios through their retirement accounts. Ownership can begin immediately. You do not need accreditation. You do not need connections. You do not need large capital. Index funds provide ownership of hundreds of companies for minimal investment. Fractional shares provide ownership of individual companies for single dollars. The barriers to ownership have never been lower in recorded history. The question is not access. The question is allocation. Are you allocating income to ownership or consumption? Component 5, reduce emotional volatility. The Hamburg study found that self-made millionaires scored low on neuroticism. They did not panic during downturns. They did not capitulate during market crashes. They maintained strategy regardless of short-term conditions. This is trainable. Meditation reduces emotional reactivity. Physical exercise reduces anxiety. Information diets reduce panic triggers. If you consume financial news hourly, your emotional volatility will track market volatility. If you check your portfolio daily, you will experience daily emotional fluctuations. The wealthy check quarterly. The wealthiest check annually. Reduce your information intake. Automate your investment contributions. Avoid looking at account balances during drawdowns. Your behavior during crises determines your long-term returns more than your behavior during stability. These 5 components constitute the behavioral code. They are not new. They are not secret. They have been documented in primary sources for 160 years. Rockefeller wrote them in Ledger A. Carnegie published them in The Gospel of Wealth. Stanley quantified them in The Millionaire Next Door. The Hamburg researchers validated them in Nature Human Behavior. Fidelity counts the millionaires they produce every quarter. The evidence is overwhelming. The mechanism is proven. The only remaining variable is your execution. You began this video watching a 16-year-old clerk record pennies in a notebook. That notebook became the template for the largest personal fortune of the 19th century. You learned that self-made millionaires share a documented personality architecture: higher conscientiousness, higher risk tolerance, higher openness, higher extroversion, lower neuroticism. These traits preceded their wealth. The traits were causes, not consequences. You discovered that 80% of American millionaires built their fortunes from zero. They lived in modest homes. They drove used cars. They saved 20% of moderate incomes. They were invisible because their wealth was stored, not displayed. You followed Carnegie from Bobbin Boy to billionaire through a 3-phase system he published for anyone to read. Acquire education, acquire capital, distribute capital. The middle phase is the long phase. The middle phase requires the behavior code. You counted 654,000 Americans who reached millionaire status through a single account type. They automated deductions. They selected diversified funds. They waited 26 years. They did not panic. They did not withdraw. They let compounding work. And you understood the critical distinction that separates the wealthy from the high-earning non-wealthy. Ownership compounds. Income flows. Migration from downstream to upstream is the mechanism. Converting labor income to capital ownership is the path. The historical record is complete. The academic studies are published. The contemporary data is filed. The mechanism Rockefeller discovered in 1865 produced millionaires then. The mechanism produced millionaires in 1889, in 1996, in 2018, and in 2025. The mechanism will produce millionaires when you are elderly. The mechanism does not expire. You possess the information Rockefeller possessed when he opened Ledger A. You possess more information. You possess digitized records, peer-reviewed studies, and quarterly data releases he never imagined. The only variable he controlled that you do not yet control is behavior. Start your ledger today. The ledger can be a spreadsheet. The ledger can be an app. The ledger can be a cloth notebook purchased for $3.57. The form does not matter. The behavior matters. Record what enters, record what exits, automate savings before spending, convert income to ownership, reinvest all returns, extend your timeline to decades, reduce your emotional volatility through information diets and automation. The code is 160 years old. The code is operational. The code is waiting. Your execution begins now.